watching No to NATO, No to War, an initiative of the Workers' Party of Britain, but which has grown globally to millions of viewers, of interested people who are determined to bring about an end to the scourge of war. Last week, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of Britain, became the 9th British Prime Minister to bomb Yemen. In fact, the Royal Air Force has been bombing Yemen since the very year that it was founded. Rishi Sunak, of course, did not even seek the approval of the rubber stamp Parliament in Westminster for the crime that he committed in Yemen. He had no care whatsoever as to the brazen illegality of two countries, for it is only two, despite the small yachts that sail under the flags of the other countries. Make no mistake about it. This is a US-UK aggression against the people of Yemen. One of my earliest memories is watching British soldiers, Scottish soldiers, gunning down Yemenis in the Crater district of the port of Aden. I knew then that the British were up to no good. Coming from an Irish family as I do, I once came home and told my Irish grandfather that the teacher had told us that Britain had an empire so vast that upon it the sun never set. And my grandfather answered, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. We are very privileged indeed to have as our special guest on No to NATO, No to War this evening, one of our most distinguished ever guests. His Excellency Muhammad Al-Bukhaiti is the governor of Dhamar Governorate in the Yemen and a member of the political bureau of the Ansar Allah, the freedom fighters, now the government of Yemen. Despite the barking dogs in hotel rooms in Riyadh, the government of Yemen. Never let anyone attempt to pejorative the fighting forces of the people of Yemen. They are ready to face all US-UK aggressions. Your Excellency, Governor Al-Bukhaiti, thank you for joining us on No to NATO, No to War this evening. Now that the US and UK have committed this armed aggression against the people of Yemen, what's going to happen next?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. في البداية تحياتي لجورج قالوي ولكل الأحرار في العالم وبالذات الأحرار في بريطانيا وأمريكا وللأستاذ جورج جالوي شعبية كبيرة عندنا في اليمن. العدوان الأمريكي البريطاني على اليمن هو ليس وليد اليوم، فهناك عدوان بدأ من عام 2015 على اليمن، ولكنه كان عدوان غير مباشر، لأن من كان يقوم بهذا العدوان المباشر هي السعودية والإمارات وبعض عملائهم داخل اليمن، وقد تكبدت اليمن الكثير من الخسائر نتيجة ذلك العدوان، وتسببت الكثير من المآسي حتى وصلت حد المجاعة. لذلك فنحن نعتبر هذا العدوان الأمريكي البريطاني المباشر على اليمن أنه أقل تأثيرا من العدوان السابق، لأنه وحد الشعب اليمني وأيضا وحد الشعوب العربية والإسلامية التي أيدت اليمن، وكذلك كل أحرار العالم. وبالتالي فمهما بلغت خسائرنا في مواجهة العدوان الأمريكي البريطاني المباشر فإنها ستكون قليلة جدا بالمقارنة بخسائرنا نتيجة الحروب الداخلية والحروب الإقليمية التي كانت بضغط، التي كانت بتشجيع ودعم من قبل أمريكا وبريطانيا. لذلك نحن مستعدين لخوض هذه المعركة حتى تحقيق أهدافها، وهدفها هو وقف جرائم الإبادة الجماعية في غزة والسماح بدخول الغذاء والدواء والوقود إلى سكانها المحاصرين.
Excellency, I mentioned that Rishi Sunak didn't even put it to the British Parliament to seek authorization for this attack. The same with Joe Biden. He didn't put it in front of the US Congress. So both of them are actually acting illegally, even under their own country's laws, never mind international law. What does that tell you about democracy in the US and the UK?
الديمقراطية لا يمكن أن تكون صالحة إلا بوجود منظومة أخلاقية للمجتمع. وللأسف الشديد أن المنظومة الأخلاقية التي حكمت الدول الغربية من بعد الحرب العالمية الثانية قد ضعفت نتيجة للانتهاكات التي ارتكبت من قبل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وحلفائها في الكثير من البلدان، وهذا انعكس بشكل سلبي على المنظومة الأخلاقية الحاكمة في أوروبا. وعندما ضعفت المنظومة الأخلاقية فبالتالي أن العملية الانتخابية أو الديمقراطية قد تكون سلبية ومدمرة. لماذا؟ لأنها قد تدفع بالأكثر تشددا إلى سدة الحكم، وهذه المخاطر أصبحت موجودة في أوروبا، وهي نتيجة لضعف المنظومة الأخلاقية نتيجة السياسة الخارجية لأمريكا والتي قادت المنظومة الأوروبية لفترة طويلة. لذلك مثلا نلاحظ أن العملية الانتخابية في الكيان الصهيوني تقوم على جماجم الفلسطينيين، وأصبحت فرص الشخصيات المعتدلة في الكيان الصهيوني للوصول إلى السلطة والذين لهم رؤية استراتيجية تكون في صالح استمرار هذا الكيان، أصبحت فرصهم في الفوز معدومة، وأصبحت الفرصة متاحة للأكثر تشددا. وبالتالي فإن المشكلة هي في ضعف المنظومة الأخلاقية. لذلك نلاحظ أن قرار العدوان على اليمن سواء من قبل الرئيس بايدن أو من قبل سوناك لم يكن هذا القرار مبررا ولم يكن أخلاقيا، أيضا لم يكن في صالح أمريكا وبريطانيا، لأن الدافع لبايدن والدافع للسوناك هو الاحتياجات الانتخابية. لذلك اتخذ قرار خاطئ حتى لا يتسق مع المصالح الأمريكية والبريطانية، لأن هذا القرار في النهاية قد أدى لدخول الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وبريطانيا في مواجهة مباشرة مع اليمن، وهذه المواجهة المباشرة ستتسع إذا ما استمرت لتكون مباشرة مع محور المقاومة، وستكون أيضا مباشرة مع كل الشعوب العربية والإسلامية الذين توحدوا خلف القرار اليمني. لذلك نحن ننصح النخبة الحاكمة التي سيطرت عليها الصهيونية في الدول الغربية لمراجعة حساباتها، وعليهم أن يدركوا أن سعيهم لإشعال الحرائق في بقية العالم سيؤدي في النهاية إلى انتشار الحريق إلى داخل الدول الأوروبية، ليس بالضرورة عبر أسلحة خصومهم، ولكن ضعف المنظومة الأخلاقية سيؤدي في النهاية إلى تحويل الديمقراطية إلى أداة للتدمير بدلا من الاستقرار.
Excellency, everybody knows that you merely applied economic sanctions on those supplying or taking goods from the genocidal regime of Netanyahu. Is that the only reason that Yemen has become the victim of this aggression? Is it just to punish you for standing up for the poor people of Gaza being murdered every hour, dozens of children and women and men? Is it only that, or is there a second agenda for these Western powers? Do they have other ambitions in Yemen other than stopping your perfectly legitimate and indeed noble sanctions against Israeli shipping in the Red Sea?
مظلومية الشعب الفلسطيني هي أقسى مظلومية في هذا العصر، ومن يقف خلف هذه المظلومية هي أقوى دولة في العالم وأقوى تحالف ممثلا بالتحالف الغربي بقيادة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. وبالتالي الوقوف مع هذه المظلومية هو أمر واجب، ولكنه يدخل أي طرف يتبنى هذه المظلومية في صدام مع أقوى دولة أو أقوى تحالف في العالم في هذا العصر. لذلك نحن نقول وبكل ثقة أن العدوان على اليمن الذي بدأ في عام 2004 بالضغط على الرئيس السابق علي عبد الله صالح بشن الحرب الأولى عليه، وأيضا العدوان على اليمن في عام 2015، كان السبب هو أن الشعب اليمني أو أنصار الله قد جعلوا قضية فلسطين قضيتهم الأولى. لذلك احتشد الباطل في العالم كله بقيادة أو بإدارة العصابة الصهيونية الحاكمة في لندن وواشنطن بالعدوان على اليمن، واستنفروا العالم. لذلك إذا كان حملنا لقضية فلسطين من ناحية نظرية ومن ناحية شعبية قد أدى إلى هذا العدوان على اليمن، فكيف سيكون الحال عندما نتدخل إلى جانب إخواننا في فلسطين؟ وبالتالي نقول بأن الهدف من عملياتنا العسكرية في عمق الكيان الصهيوني أو عملياتنا البحرية في البحر الأحمر والعربي، الهدف منها هو وقف جرائم الإبادة الجماعية في غزة، وأيضا السماح بإدخال الغذاء والدواء والوقود إلى سكانها المحاصرين. وعندما تتوقف تلك الجرائم ويرفع الحصار عن غزة، سنوقف كل عملياتنا سواء في العمق الصهيوني أو في البحرين العربي والأحمر فورا وبشكل تلقائي. ولكن إذا ما استمر العدوان على اليمن فنحن سنستمر في المواجهة، ونحن على ثقة بتحقيق النصر، لأننا نتوكل على الله سبحانه وتعالى. صحيح أن أمريكا وبريطانيا لا يدركون حقيقة الوعود الإلهية بالنصر، ولكن نقول لهم عليكم أن تراجعوا تاريخكم في العدوان على اليمن. فلولا أن أمريكا تدخلت وشنت علينا الحرب الأولى في صعدة عام 2004 عبر الرئيس علي صالح، لما استطاع اليمن أن يحقق ثورة 2014 التي أدت لطرد السفير الأمريكي من صنعاء الذي كان هو الحاكم الفعلي لليمن، وأيضا طرد المارينز الأمريكي من صنعاء، وإخراج اليمن من الفلك الأمريكي إلى دول محور المقاومة. أيضا لولا العدوان الأمريكي البريطاني السعودي الإماراتي على اليمن في عام 2015 لما استطاع اليمن أن يقوم بهذا الدور الكبير في نصرة إخواننا في فلسطين. وكما أن أمريكا وبريطانيا قد ندمت على عدوانها السابق، على اعتداءاتها السابقة علينا، فإنها ستندم أكثر على هذا العدوان، وسيكون هذا العدوان على اليمن إذا ما استمر هو أكبر خطأ تاريخي في تاريخ أمريكا وتاريخ بريطانيا.
Excellency, as you know, the people of Gaza have millions, hundreds of millions of friends all over the world, and all of them now love Yemen also. You are a member of the political bureau of the most popular people's army anywhere in the world right now. What would be your message for the people of the United Kingdom and the United States of America in the wake of this new aggression?
رسالتي للشعب الأمريكي والشعب البريطاني هو أننا لا نعادي الشعب الأمريكي ولا الشعب البريطاني، وإنما عداءنا هو للنخبة الصهيونية الحاكمة في واشنطن ولندن، والتي تسببت في الكثير من المآسي في العالم، سواء في جنوب أفريقيا أو في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وأفريقيا أو في آسيا أو في شرق آسيا أو حتى في أوروبا. بالنسبة لنا نحن لم نعلن تأييدنا للعملية العسكرية لروسيا في أوكرانيا، رغم أن الحكومة الأوكرانية قد أيدت العدوان على اليمن، وأيضا أيدت العدوان الإسرائيلي على غزة، لأننا نقيم الأمور من منطلقات أخلاقية وليس من منطلقات المصلحة. ولكننا نؤكد أنه حتى الحرب في أوكرانيا هي نتيجة للسياسات الأمريكية الخاطئة وعدم وفائها بوعودها لروسيا فيما يتعلق بعدم توسيع حلف الناتو الذي لم يعد له أي مبررات منطقية وأخلاقية للاستمرار أو للوجود. لذلك نحن نقول لهم ينبغي علينا أن نوحد جهودنا، كل الأحرار في العالم سواء في أمريكا أو بريطانيا أو في بقية دول العالم وبالذات الدول الأوروبية، لأن الصهاينة في العالم وأنصار الباطل يتوحدون فيما بينهم وينظمون أمورهم، وبالتالي علينا أن نوحد جهودنا، خصوصا وأن المعركة التي يخوضها الشعب اليمني أصبحت معركة واضحة المعالم، لم يعد هناك أي مجال للريب فيها أو اللبس فيها، فالحق واضح والباطل واضح. ونحن نؤكد أن هذه الحرب هي حرب فريدة من نوعها، لأن ساحتها الأخلاقية والقيمية أهم وأشمل من ساحتها العسكرية. واليمن وكذلك الفلسطينيين قد استطعنا أن ننتصر في هذه الحرب الأخلاقية، ولأن الانتصار في جبهة الوعي هو أهم بالنسبة لنا من الانتصار في الجبهة العسكرية. واليمن قد انتصر في جبهة الوعي من أول جولة وفي أول اشتباك مع القوات الأمريكية وبالضربة القاضية، حيث أن العالم اليوم أصبح أمام خيارين: إما أن يقف إلى جانب من يسعون لوقف جرائم الإبادة الجماعية ويسعون لفك الحصار عن غزة من أجل إدخال الغذاء والدواء والوقود لسكانها المحاصرين الذين يعانون اليوم من الجوع، وليس اليمن وحده يقف مع هذه المطالب، العالم كله يقف مع هذه المطالب. وبالتالي العالم أصبح مخير، أما أن يقف مع هؤلاء أو يقف إلى جانب من يرتكبون جرائم الإبادة الجماعية أو من يدعمهم أو يحميهم. وبالتالي نحن نعتبر أن الانتصار في معركة الوعي أهم من الانتصار في المعركة العسكرية. وحتى المعركة العسكرية نقول للإدارة الأمريكية وكذلك للإدارة البريطانية أنكم غير قادرين على الانتصار فيها، لأن القوات المسلحة اليمنية لا زالت تفرض حصارا على مرور السفن الإسرائيلية ولم تستطيعوا أن تحققوا أي هدف في هذا المجال. أضف إلى ذلك أن بريطانيا وأمريكا بهذا التصرف قد حرمتا نفسيهما من الملاحة البحرية في البحر الأحمر والبحر العربي، وبالتالي ستخسر العصابة الصهيونية الحاكمة في واشنطن ولندن معركتها، سواء في جبهة الوعي أو في الجبهة العسكرية.
And a final message, Governor, to the people of Gaza from Ansar Allah.
ورسالتنا إلى إخواننا في غزة أننا سنستمر في منع دخول السفن الإسرائيلية عبر البحر الأحمر أو عبر البحر العربي، وأيضا ستستمر عملياتنا في عمق الكيان الصهيوني حتى يتوقف هذا العدوان، والعدوان الأمريكي البريطاني المباشر على اليمن أو ضمنا أو وضعنا في قائمة الإرهاب لن يؤثر على قرارنا، وخصوصا وأن أمريكا قد حاولت إغراءنا عندما أدركت أنها لن تستطيع تخويفنا، حيث قاموا وعرضوا علينا على حكومة صنعاء، عرضوا علينا الاعتراف بحكومة صنعاء وكذلك التخلي عن أدواتهم في المنطقة والداخل مقابل أن نوقف عملياتنا العسكرية، ولكننا رفضنا ذلك. ونؤكد لكم بأن صمودكم في مواجهة الصهاينة قد حقق لنا الكثير من المكاسب، ومهما ضحينا من أجلكم فنحن نشكركم، لأنه لولا صمودكم لما توحد الشعب اليمني ولما توحد العرب وتوحدت الأمة الإسلامية ولما تحرك كل أحرار العالم. وهناك اليوم صحوة، العالم يشهد صحوة كبيرة، وذلك بفضل صمودكم. نحن نعرف أن خسائركم كبيرة جدا ومعاناتكم كبيرة جدا، ولكن إن شاء الله بعدها سيتحقق النصر بفضل صمودكم.
Long live Yemen, Arabia, Felix, and may it inspire the Arabs and the Muslims and all peace and justice loving people all over the world. Governor, I'm grateful to you for joining us tonight on No to NATO, No to War.
شكرا لك ولكل أحرار العالم، ولكم شعبية كبيرة في اليمن، وهذه فرصة لن تكون الأولى ولن تكون الأخيرة من أجل التواصل فيما بيننا.
Thank you so much.
شكرا لك.
Well, a pretty extraordinary interview. The more extraordinary because nobody anywhere in the media has attempted to bring us the Yemeni perspective on what exactly is going on in the Red Sea, neither from a political or a military perspective. Joe Biden was asked today if his attacks on Yemen were proving successful or were working. He said, working? Well, are they stopping the Houthis, as he called them? No. Will they continue? Yes. In other words, they're achieving absolutely nothing at all, but they're going to continue doing what they have started to do. Perhaps they think it's fun to be killing people in the Yemen. After all, they've been practicing it for so many centuries. If Gaza is now the moral center of the world, then I think that interview shows that Yemen is pretty center to it also. I have two outstanding guests with us tonight on No to NATO, No to War. The first is Richard Medhurst, a regular guest and indeed one of the founders of No to NATO, No to War. He is a journalist and broadcaster of the highest note, and we are very grateful to see him again this evening. Richard, welcome to the show. I'm right, haven't I? Listening to that, it was all about the moral and ethical questions of whether you stand with the people committing the genocide or whether you stand with the victims.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. And that was really an excellent interview. And thank you for bringing on the Yemeni perspective. You know, I have to start out by saying that the Yemenis are really poking giant holes in all the stories, all the propaganda that has been constructed against them in the West for the past decades. And you mentioned the fact that they are, you know, just as Gaza, a moral compass for the world. This is absolutely true. You know, no one could possibly fault the Yemenis for their patriotism, for their dedication, for their persistence and their perseverance. We have to remember that Yemen was a British colony. You know, anyone can go and look up the slew of brutal videos of how Yemenis were treated, and in the end, you know, they kicked the British army out. It was very difficult for Yemen to stay under their control. And then we had again the Saudi-led aggression with British bombs and Canadian bombs and American bombs, which destroyed a large part of Yemen. And yet the Yemenis go out of their way to impose this blockade, which again is in full accordance with the Genocide Convention and international law, and they put to shame many of the so-called Arab monarchs and Muslim leaders who have done nothing to stand with Gaza, and so they set an example for the rest of the world and for the Arab world and the Muslim world, and they should be applauded for that. Not to mention the fact that on the battlefield, when it comes to you know, the military aspect, I mean, they're making a fool out of the Royal Navy and the U.S. Navy. You know, all these cruise missiles and the spy satellites and the signals intelligence, all these, you know, technologies that we possess. What have they achieved in the end? You know, David Cameron goes around boasting about how good it is to bomb Yemen and how right it is. And yet he's failed to achieve a single objective. You know, the Yemenis still have the blockade in effect. They're still preventing Israeli ships and Israeli linked ships from coming in. And now it risks being enlarged to British ships and American ships as well, commercial ships, that is. So, you know, we've shot ourselves in the foot, essentially, and achieved absolutely nothing. And we've done all of this just for the sake of defending Zionism and defending colonial interests. And what I want to know is you know, you mentioned that the fact that David Cameron and Joe Biden didn't even bother going in front of Parliament or Congress. What I would like to know is what about the British people? You know, I think you'd agree with me, George. I'm sick of you know, the successive gang of criminals in Number 10 going away and bombing other countries in our name, and then making us look bad, because then people say, well, the British did that as a collective, even though it's a tiny minority of criminals. And so they keep killing innocent civilians in Gaza and doing that as well by bombing Yemen. And then, you know, they basically put a stain on us with their behavior. And not to mention the fact that it's hypocritical, because they don't even bother going through the democratic institutions that we love to lecture other people around the world about. And so, you know, just for the sake of greediness, just for the sake of supporting Israel, they carry out all this behavior. And I want to say something here that, you know, when we talk about the last No2Nato meeting that we had, I outlined, and I did this in several videos, I talked about the economic plans that Netanyahu had with the Saudis, with the Indians. They wanted to build an economic corridor that would go from India to the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and then up into Israel. And this would be a rival to China's Silk Road. And the irony of all this is that Yemen have now sabotaged this completely. And they've also sabotaged any plans of turning Gaza into this Ben Gurion canal, which would be a rival to the Suez Canal. Because even if the Israelis would somehow liquidate all of Gaza, which it seems they're intent on doing, and build this canal, it would be completely defunct and useless, because Yemen have blocked off the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea from connecting to the Mediterranean. And so we really have to applaud them, because not only on a moral, you know, on a moral footing, but also from a military point of view, but a geostrategic point of view, they are succeeding in all of their goals. And they are truly a popular army, and the most popular one across the world, not just inside of Yemen. And so they should be applauded for this, because they are upholding their own values, and they're upholding the international law that we claim to uphold for us.
Two significant things happened today. Well, more than two, but let me focus on two significant things that happened in Palestine today. First of all, Netanyahu said something that would have got him arrested, presumably in London, that from the river to the sea, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. It doesn't quite have the ring of its alternative or its opposite, but that's what he said. That would get you arrested in London or in Berlin, for that matter. And the second thing was the on-camera destruction of the Palestine University in Gaza. Now, this university was protected by all the laws of war, protected by the Geneva Conventions, There was no conceivable military reason for doing it. Israeli soldiers have been occupying it for many weeks, actually for 2 months. And then they destroyed it with 315 bombs, and they filmed themselves doing it. This was an act of genocide on camera, whilst the judges at the ICJ are weighing up their verdict. How brazen is that, Richard?
It's frankly disgusting, George, and I know precisely what you're referring to, the video. And there's a United Nations Special Rapporteur who referred to this as educaricide, basically the assassination or the killing of learning. And I'm sure you recall during the ICJ proceedings that you referred to, they talked about the effect that Israel's war has on Gaza's future, not just right now on people's mental and physical well-being, but what about the future generations? How will they grow up? How will they get an education? How will they study? Because remember, Gaza, has an extremely bright population, not to mention a young population. And so their success is certainly at stake here, not to mention their lives, of course. And during the ICJ proceedings, they talked about how you've had hundreds of deans, teachers, academics, scholars that have already been killed in Gaza. So the people that are responsible with bringing up, educating, and raising the current and future generations of Gaza have been killed off by Israel, which again is not only a crime against humanity, it's a crime against civilization itself, because you're ensuring that education and learning do not continue, that they cease. And then, of course, the fact that 60% of the schools in Gaza have been shut down, that whether they've been damaged or completely destroyed, it doesn't matter. The point is that people are not going to those schools anymore. And then, of course, this sick, snuff video that you referred to, where they blowing up a university, the University of Palestine. It never ceases to amaze me how Israelis love incriminating themselves. I think it's a mix of arrogance and also just this mafia-like air about them, because they know that they can get away with this. No one is going to hold them accountable. There's a British Israeli soldier who just came back from Gaza. If he were Muslim and he'd gone to fight somewhere else, whether we're talking about Al-Qaeda inside of Syria, or pick any other scenario or theater of war you like, he'd probably be arrested on arrival back in the UK. But because this man is Jewish and he's Israeli, the fact that he's gone to a theater of war where a genocide is being committed, he gets carte blanche, and he just walks around free and goes to give talks to Jewish boys so he can indoctrinate them with this sick Zionist thuggishness. And so I think it's disgusting that they've filmed themselves going through people's things, blowing up schools, blowing up people's houses. And the fact that we do nothing about this, it incriminates and implicates us as well, because we allow this behavior to go on. We not only supply the bombs, we not only provide them with the ordnance and the weaponry, but we then do nothing about it. And when Netanyahu, you talked about his statement about from the river to the sea, I find this very ironic. I also noticed that too, the fact that he can get away with this, but if you or I said this, we'd probably get arrested, and many people have been arrested. And so this illustrates, once again, it highlights the double standard, it highlights the hypocrisy, and it shows you that every Zionist accusation is always a confession.
Thank you, Richard. We'll come back to you. I'd like to bring in our second guest, Thomas Fazi, a writer, a journalist, and a socialist, and a broadcaster of Note. Thomas, thanks for joining us. You saw the interview with the member of the Politburo of Ansar Allah. I was rather impressed by him. What about you?
Absolutely, it was rather extraordinary. But I would say more in general, what Ansar Allah and the Yemenites are doing at the moment, I think will go down in history as a crucial historical turning point in the modern era. I mean, here we have one of the poorest countries in the world taking on the world's most powerful military, the US and NATO in a larger sense, and succeeding. As has been mentioned already, the U.S. NATO response has been a complete failure. The fact of the matter is that the U.S. Has no means of stopping the Yemenite blockade, short of a full-blown ground invasion of Yemen, which would be, of course, disastrous for the U.S. As well. And they know it very well. And so here we have this extraordinary situation where the U.S., formerly the world's so-called policeman, in fact, I would say the world's mafia boss, is completely unable to impose its will in a region that for a long time it has considered to be it's one of its courtyards, and where it effectively dictated the rules for a very long time. Clearly that is no longer the case. And so what we're witnessing points to a much bigger story, and that's the terminal structural decline of the U.S. imperial system, which has been happening for some time now, but has really been turbocharged over the past 2 years, especially since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with the NATO support for Ukraine completely backfiring against the West, with Russia and China actually increasing not only ties among themselves, but also their ties with the rest of the world. So what we're witnessing is effectively, I would say, a global uprising against the Western-led international order, and especially the US-led international order. And it's extraordinary. The Yemenites are at the forefront of this struggle. But then you have all the other actors around, which, if we look at, for example, the OPEC countries, the Gulf states, if we look at Saudi Arabia, formerly one of America's strongest allies in the region, who is effectively sitting this war out. I mean, they've been bombing Yemen. They've been at war with Yemen for almost a decade, and yet they've chosen to stay out of this conflict. They haven't followed the US in their military response to Ansar Allah, and in fact, they've criticized the US for its actions and have called for restraint. So clearly, they are prioritizing the stabilization of the Middle East. They're prioritizing their own interests over US and Western interests. And so what we're witnessing is really a radical shift in the middle, not in the global geopolitical landscape, but in the Middle Eastern geopolitical landscape more specifically. So it's really quite extraordinary. We're witnessing history in the making, I would say.
I was struck by the sophistication of the governor's angles that he was taking. I mean, we're always told that they call them Houthis, they call them rebels. We're led to believe, they want us to believe, that they're obscurantist, fundamentalists. But he was from the Politburo of Ansar Allah, taking a remarkably universalist perspective on all of this. He was quite clear. He was not against the British and American people, not against the people of any Western country. He located the whole thing in anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist terms, didn't he?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's the really striking aspect of all this, is that on the one hand, you have the US and the West formally standing in defense of this rules-based order, which in fact, is clearly evident to everyone now to be simply a US rule-based order, an order where the US, was took upon itself the right to do essentially whatever it wanted, sure in the fact that it would face no consequences. And that is that US rule-based order has brought chaos and destruction, not just to the Middle East, but in many regions of the world. And then you have these so-called rebels, these so-called terrorists, or these so-called tyrannical or rogue nations that are in fact doing nothing more than standing up for the international order. I mean, the Yemenites have been very clear about the fact that what they're doing is upholding the genocide convention. You have countries like Russia and China. What all they're saying is let's return to a truly international law-based order, not a Western rule-based order. And so you have this complete, I would say, reversal where, in fact, it's like that meme, are we the baddies? Well, it turns out we are the baddies. And those groups and countries that we've been describing as terrorists, rogue states, etc., and are, in fact, the ones that are standing up for a much more just, for a much more rule-based, legal-based order. So it really is quite extraordinary, and I think it's been great to have the Ansar Allah speaker on the show, because we never get to hear the other side in Western media. We get this completely filtered account of events, and in fact, what we're seeing is that reality is in fact the opposite of what we're told. We are the ones that are, sowing chaos and war and destruction and supporting genocide in Gaza. And it's these so-called terrorists that are in fact standing up for humanity, for morality, and for some semblance of a law-based order. So it's truly historical.
Now, President Putin today reiterated Russia and China's demand for immediate progress towards a Palestinian state. Netanyahu ruled that out. He was unequivocal to the Americans. There will be no Palestinian state, even after this latest massacre in Gaza comes to an end. However, it comes to an end, thus laughing in the face of all these European and North American leaders who pretend, at least, that their policy is for a two-state solution to be worked out. Netanyahu, who's receiving all their money and all their weapons, says there will be no Palestinian state. What do you make of that?
Well, again, I mean, we're going through profoundly, revelatory times, and I think the events in Gaza haven't just really made it clear to everyone what the true morals of the West and Israel are, but I think they've revealed more in general that the history that we've been told of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is just one big lie. Netanyahu himself, in a recent press conference, said that he's been fighting a two-state solution for the past 30 years. And so what he's saying is that Israel has, in fact, never been interested in a two-state solution. Anyone that's followed the peace negotiations that have occurred over the years and the decades understood that very clearly. We know that Israel has never offered Palestine a true state. So it's always been a matter, this two-state solution has always been a way of simply buying time for Israel as it continued and consolidated its settler colonial project in the West Bank, in Gaza, and throughout Palestine. And I think now that's becoming clear. You were joking about the saying from the river to the sea, but in fact, Israel has always been very clear that it aims to control all of Greater Israel. It aims to control all the land from the river to the sea. This has always been either the official or semi-official Israeli policy. And so what we're witnessing in the genocide and the ethnic cleansing that we're witnessing in Gaza wasn't something that was decided on a whim. It's not simply Israel acting blinded by hatred or revenge. This is part of a clear policy, a long-standing policy. And so they saw this as a great opportunity to make a great stride forward in this policy of essentially dispossession and expulsion of the Palestinians. And so, these, at the very least, through this tragedy, I think the people of the world have acquired clarity about what is happening in the region. But more in general, we have, I think, an entire generation that is really opening its eyes to the reality of how our world works and the responsibilities of the US and of the West for the chaos and destruction and war that have that have been ongoing for decades in several regions of the world. So at the very least, if we want to see a silver lining, is that the Western elites will never enjoy the same kind of the same consensus that they've enjoyed for so long, because so many people are have opened their eyes over the past 3 months.
Never glad, confident morning again. We'll come back to you, Thomas, for a last word, but let me go back to Richard Medhurst first. Richard, they've killed thousands of Palestinian children in Gaza, but here's a number for you. There are 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza right now. So there's a net increase in the population of the Palestinian population of Gaza coming soon. Although I should say there's a record number, 300% increase in the number of miscarriages as a result of the atrocities being carried out. But still there's 50,000 babies waiting to be born. So of course the intent is genocidal, but it's doomed to fail, isn't it? Unless you literally killed 2.3 million people. And you like to imagine that that would be impossible in 2024 in the world. It's actually doomed to fail, isn't it?
Yeah, so a couple of points there, George, because the Israelis, they like to point at the population of Gaza as it's gone up in the last decades and say, you see, this is proof that there is no genocide, there's no ethnic cleansing, there's no mistreatment of Palestinians. It's ironic because it proves the opposite. The population in Gaza has gone up because the Israelis took all the Palestinians, kicked them out of their homes, and then shoved them into the Gaza concentration camp. So of course the population went up. And we should say that Palestinians, they have already been through a Nakba. It's still ongoing. They are not going to go anywhere. They are intent on living, and just to live as a Palestinian is an act of rebellion and an act of resistance. Just to survive, to stay alive, to have children, to have a family, despite all this hell that is imposed on them. This in and of itself is an act of resistance, and it's something that the Israelis they cannot contend with, because the drive that Palestinians have, it only comes in people who are native to the land, who know that this land is ours. You can't drive people out. They're not going to go anywhere. They will do whatever it takes. But that we should say at the same time that what the Israelis are doing, they've killed over 24,000 people now at least with bombs. But the UN and other NGOs are warning that because of the lack of water that's coming in, because of the lack of food, that you're going to have a lot of outbreaks of easily preventable diseases, of infections, because of the lack of medicine and because of the lack of water. And so they fear that even more people are going to die, God forbid, than those that were killed by the bombs. So when you talk about all these pregnant women and those who've had miscarriages, they are a group that is particularly at risk because they need, even in peacetime, in a normal situation, they need delicate attention and care. But in a war zone, and not just a war zone, but this is a besieged strip of land that is a concentration camp. As you said, the miscarriages have gone up by 300%. I mean, it is a genocide by every quantifiable measure and metric. So the fact that this is happening in broad daylight in 2024, and we are still having to argue with Zionists about whether it's happening or not is shocking to me, because we've never had a more well-documented genocide and seen it live as it began. And the thing is that Annalena Baerbock, who's the German foreign minister, you know, she likes to pretend that she's a feminist, as do many people in the West. But when it comes to women from Syria or women from Palestine who have, you know, have drowned in the Mediterranean Sea trying to run away from Western wars, or had their children drown alongside them, or who are having miscarriages right now in Gaza, or who can't feed their already born children, they don't seem to care about these women. And you know, I find this really shocking and disrespectful and insulting, and it's hypocrisy of the highest order. And actually, Baerbock was confronted while she was giving a speech about feminism by people saying, "Where's your sympathy for the Palestinian women in Gaza and their children and their plight and their struggles as mothers in a war zone?" We should remember that Germany, you know, it's not like she's just idle. Germany is the second country it's the country that's giving Israel the most weapons after the United States. So she is playing an active role in killing those women, as are many other European and Western countries. And so we need to remember that when we talk about the rights of women and when we talk about feminism, because these are the women that are the most at risk and are put in the most precarious situations on the planet and struggling the most. And yet no one talks about them.
Brilliant. Richard Medhurst, as always, thank you for your contribution to No to NATO, No to War, right from the very first day of our existence. Thomas Fazi, you're a man of the world, you're a European man of the world, and an intellectual of note. The point that Richard was implicitly making there grabbed my attention. That all over the world, not just Baerbock, who before all this began would have defined herself as a progressive, as a green, as a feminist, and of course there are many like her in all European countries, and some of them in government, some of them in parliament. I mean, these are people, by the way, in Europe who were so scandalized by the ugly, vulgar behavior and language of Donald Trump that they could not bear to gaze upon him. And yet they are able to look away entirely at the slaughter of women and children, thousands upon thousands of them, without saying jack. Never mind, you know, the campaign for sanitary protection, to be free of value-added tax in Britain, and so on. What about the women in Gaza? Don't even have a toilet to go to. It doesn't seem to have pulled any heartstrings for the European so-called liberal, so-called progressive, so-called left.
Absolutely. I mean, the hypocrisy is absolutely disgusting, but it's something that we've been seeing for some time now. The weaponization of progressive causes in the name of imperialism. That's something that's been ongoing for quite some time. You know, the West has always tried to cloak its own imperial interventions in a in a humanitarian vest. So it's various wars of aggression were always done in the name of democracy, Iraq and so forth. And now they've expanded their progressive toolbox. Now it's not just in the name of democracy. Now they're justifying chastising China in the name of the rights of minorities. They're justifying intervening in unruly countries because supposedly they don't respect human rights and so on and so forth. And so what we've seen and what we're witnessing and what we've been seeing for quite some time is in fact the co-opting of progressivism in the name of empire. So what we have now is this kind of woke imperialism. I think Baerbock herself coined the term feminist foreign policy, but of course the hypocrisy of that is being laid bare in Gaza and elsewhere. And I think the position of European governments is, if possible, even worse than America's, because at least America can tell itself that it is pursuing some, criminal, misguided notion of its imperial national interest, and of course that's failing on its own terms as well. But when it comes to Europe, what we're seeing is essentially an entire continent, at least when it comes to its political class, that has become nothing more than an appendage of U.S. imperial power, to a great cost to Europe itself. Look at the the economic blowback of the proxy war in Ukraine for Europe. America, in the short term, can be said to have benefited in some respects. It's definitely not benefiting in the wider scheme of things, but it benefited in terms of gas exports, in terms of boosting its own military-industrial complex, and first and foremost in terms of reasserting its hegemony over Europe. Europe has absolutely nothing to gain from these supporting these criminal imperial ventures. I mean, it's I find it very ironic that now we have large, most people on the right and even the far right supporting the Zionist aggression in Gaza without and even supporting the very explicit plans for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from Gaza, without stopping to think for a moment that if the Israelis were to achieve their aims, were to succeed in expelling large amounts of Gazans from Gaza, sending them to Egypt and other countries, that would of course create a huge influx of immigrants to Europe. One of the things that they supposedly are opposed to, and so it's just not only is it morally criminal what Europeans are supporting, it's also completely self-defeating from a political strategic standpoint. So I think Europe really is the actor that history, I think, will judge most harshly, possibly even more harshly than the way it will judge America's actions.
Thank you, Thomas. You've been an excellent guest. I hope we see you again soon. Thank you, Thomas Fazi. Thank you, Richard Medhurst. Thank you, Governor Al-Bukhaiti. And above all, thanks to Alan and to Chris and to Lauren for producing this show this evening, and thanks to you for watching it. I hope you spread it far and wide. See you next time.